Well, good afternoon. Again, I am Reverend Sherry L. Jackson in Alexandria, Louisiana, and we are continuing our study of the Old Testament. This is Lesson 12. Tonight, we are going to focus on Genesis 34. Genesis 34, a sister's rape and brother's revenge. Before we delve into that, it is a good time to look at the family tree, the descendants of Terah. And remember that Terah was the father of Abram, or also known as Abraham. It is Abraham who is told to leave his family, to leave his kindred, his country, and to go to a place that God is going to show him. Also, God made some promises to Abraham and entered into covenant with him and told him that he was going to be the father of many nations. Well, at that time, when God entered into covenant with Abram, he was 75. He was 75. He was impotent, and his wife Sarah was barren. So the question becomes, how in the world is God going to bring about a nation out of a 75-year-old and a woman who is barren? But as we can see, and as we've gone through our lessons, we could see that God has made good on his promises. And if we look at the chart here to see, we can follow the descendants of Terah. We see that we started out with Abram, who became Abraham, and his wife Sarah. This is who was given the original promise. But if we look at this chart, we could just about tell the story from the beginning. We see that Abraham wondering himself, how is God going to bring this to pass? And his wife certainly did, and asked him to go into Hagar's tent. Hagar has a son with Abram who becomes Ishmael. But God said, that is not the son that I promised you and Sarah. So therefore, he gave them Isaac. If you look at back on Hagar's side, Ishmael brings about a line also, because God said that even though Ishmael was not the promised son, God was still going to make sure that he was blessed. But coming through Abraham and Sarah's line, we have Isaac, which we've talked about, who begets or has Jacob. He gets his cousin, basically, Rebecca, marries her. They have Jacob. And you can also see that Rebecca comes from the line of Nahor, which was Abram's brother. Remember, Abram told his servant to get a wife for Isaac not out of the Canaanites, but one, he has specific instructions, and he brings back Rebecca. Isaac and Rebecca has twins. Remember, Esau and Jacob. Then Jacob gets Leah and Rachel. Now we didn't go through this story a whole lot. However, we do perhaps remember that he wanted Rachel, but ended up having to work for Leah, and then work another 7 years to get Rachel. And he also had Zilpah and Bilhah, which were servants of Leah and Rachel. So through these women, these 4 women, Jacob has 12 sons and he has 1 daughter. Now, I know that last week I mentioned that there were 2 daughters, but there is 1 mentioned daughter in the scriptures. If he did have others, they were not listed. And as a matter of fact, it was highly unusual that a daughter's name would be named at all. Nevertheless, the brother Dinah is named, and she comes through the line of Leah. And this is the story that we're going to take up tonight. And it's also interesting to see that Moses and Aaron, who will be introduced in Exodus, will come through the line of Levi. And finally, Jesus will come through the line of David, who comes through the line of Judah, who was one of Jacob's 12 sons. So we're going to take up the story of Dinah tonight in Genesis 34. And so let's make sure that we have our scriptures near Genesis 34, because to fully understand this story, we're going to have to walk through this chapter. But the setting of this story takes place in Shechem, which is a Canaanite city. And I got this here, this picture, to show what a city would have looked like, what Shechem would have looked like. This was considered a city, which meant that there was a diverse group of people there who had various backgrounds, customs, and religious beliefs. And they all came together in Shechem, which later will become the community of Israel. So, in chapter 34, there are 4 stories in one. The rape of Dinah, an attempt of reconciliation, circumcision of the men of Shechem, and a massacre of men of Shechem. Now, it is to have a rape narrative in the Bible. This is one of about 2. Tamar was another woman who was raped, and this is a story that is not off, it's kind of like overlooked, or it's kind of like glossed over. I was at a place last week, a women's conference last week, and they kind of like casually talked about Tamar. But the fact of the matter is she was raped. And I think that is important if we're going to tell the whole story. We have to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that is something powerful about telling these stories, especially for women who sometimes may have found themselves in similar positions. I don't ever want to take that lightly. But as we continue with this grand story, the drama continues. And now Abraham's grandson is just as dysfunctional as his daddy and grandfather. You know, there's a saying that the apple does not fall too far from the tree, and this is certainly the case when it comes to Jacob's household. No one in the story concerning Diana is without blame. There's enough blame to go around. Last week we talked about the reconciliation of Esau and Jacob. Um, and some suggest that this story is kind of like one that is a consequence of Jacob's lie to Esau. Even though they have reconciled, there are still some residue that continues. Even in our own families, you might think about something that have happened in your family, even though it is not prevalent right now. There may be some residuals of some things or some actions that were taken long ago that is still manifesting itself in the family. And this story of Dinah is perhaps one of those stories. The character flaw of Jacob in this story is that he does not become the family leader that he needs to after his daughter is raped. There's also, we're going to learn that justice must be from God. We know and we'll see that the brothers tried to step up and revenge for their sister's rape, but at the end of the day, justice must come from God. This is a difficult chapter, but there are lessons for us to learn. And even through this unfortunate incident, God continues to teach his people. So when we begin this story in Genesis in 34:1, it says, and Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And I'm reading from the King James Version. It is not known how long they stayed in Shechem and Sukkah. Dinah, Leah's daughter, she must have been between 13 and 15 years old when this took place. And her older brothers, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, were in their 20s. Now, it's interesting that Moses writes that she is the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob. It did not say that she was Jacob's daughter. It says she was the daughter of Leah. Now, this is very unusual in the scriptures to have a daughter and a mother being named together. Now, as we said before, Leah was not Jacob's favorite. She was what we would call perhaps a rebound. He really wanted Rachel. And the father-in-law made him get Leah first and then get Rachel, but he still did not perhaps give Leah the same attention that he had given Rachel. And as a result, perhaps Dinah did not get the same attention or the attention that she needed from her father. And so it says that she was the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob. It's almost like she's really Leah's child, and Jacob just happened to be the sperm donor. We do know that in this period, in this time, that sons were prized possessions. So the fact that Dinah was named and the fact that her story is told is a very unusual thing when it comes to scripture. always remember that the scriptures that we have originated from another time and another culture, which means that we have to be very careful when we transfer that culture to the 21st century. So, without giving details of where she was or how it happened, the Bible simply says that Shechem, the son of a local ruler, took hold of her, had sexual intercourse with her by force. So if we keep reading in verse 2, and when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. Now, there are many translations. Some translations will use the word rape. Some would say he lay with her. Some will say, he subdued her. But when you really dig down to it, it says that he took her violently. He took her violently. And remember, because women had no say, she became the property that he wanted at that time. So it says that he saw her, he took her, lay with her, and defiled her. So there was seeing, there was desiring, and then taking. Now this is the same pattern that we saw in the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. That they saw, they desired, and then they took. And I think that there was a song somewhere along the way called Strange Fruit. And I think that it had something to do with white women, black men wanting or having white women, if I'm not mistaken. If somebody's on the line who knows a little bit more about that, let me know. But this is still the same type of situation. Now, it is also interesting that we only see Dinah taking action in the first verse. Everything else is done to her, including the rape. So it begins with her having one decisive action, and that action was going outside of her father's home to the land of Canaan. Now, we've already said that Canaan was a pagan city. Remember that Abraham did not want Isaac's wife to come out of Canaan because he did not want an intermarrying or mixing of pagan with a family that worshiped Yahweh. So here it is, his granddaughter, his great-granddaughter rather, Abram's great-granddaughter, doing exactly what Abram did not want to take place. So she leaves. Her only thing that she did was she left to see the daughters of the land. Perhaps she was gone looking for friendship. Some studies and commentary said that this was not the first time that she had been out, and perhaps like with all these brothers, she was looking for companionship. Or either way, she left the confines of her family's home, as some would say, for the city's light. And for doing this, she is taken, she is seized, and raped by Shechem. And Shechem was a prince. So not only was he male, but he was also a local ruler, which meant that whatever he said, when whatever he wanted, he got. And so it begins with her taking an action. She is the actor, and from then on, she is the object. Everything else is done to her or about her. So after forcing himself upon her, when we get to the next verse, there's nothing else about this rape. We don't know how it happened, where it happened. We don't know how she felt about it happening. It's just like it was over. And I think for me, that was a little lacking. I certainly would have wanted to hear from her. But again, this is a different time. You know, there was no rape kits, there was no DNA test, there was no crime scene, because it was not a crime at this time. It was not a crime at this time. She was simply property. Pastor Green, would you like to chime in?
About, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
It sounds like a long time ago as we read Genesis 34, how that Dinah was violated, forcefully, raped. That culture in that day, females had no rights. The father could arrange a marriage, as did Abraham, as did Isaac, and go ahead and bring me a wife. Hopefully, like in Rachel's case, she was willing. Rebecca was willing to come to a stranger and become a wife. But if those of us who study our history, and from 1619 until nearly 1900, black women, and it was so painful when I spent time in Ghana and spent in the dungeons and looked and walked through how they treated slaves. They would take slaves, and the dungeon was on the bottom floor, and they would draw water and just run water. Everybody was naked, and they'd have all these women naked in this dungeon. And the white soldiers or the government or whomever wanted, they'd give you a lay of the castle in El Mino. The dungeon is where the slaves were. The army was on the first floor. The church had the second floor, and the governor was on the top floor, which was the fourth floor in these castles. But the stair went all the way down to the dungeon. They could stand on their balcony inside and say, bring that one up. And they had back stairs where they just brought them up and raped them at will. And many of the mulattoes, or the babies of the slaves and the military and the governor, those who were in charge, many of those babies were, they call them mulatto. They weren't slaves or black or white, but they would keep them around to do chores. And so when you stop and think, there were some consequences that Dinah's brothers put on Shechem and the whole family and the whole tribe. But in our case, it happened over and over and over, and there were no consequences. The church was on the second floor, and they watched all of this go on, and there was no consequences as long as they were black, because they considered black to be not fully human, but 4/5 human, and you could do what you want to with no remorse and no punishment. So when we couple that in to our background, then we were treated worse than Jacob's daughter, because at the end of the day, Haman wanted to marry her, he wanted to trade the cattle, he trade anything, I just want her. So he wanted at least to keep her as part of is his wife. He wanted to keep her, he wanted to buy, he wanted to do whatever it took. He was willing to risk his life for her. And I think there's a big difference when you see how this play out with the chief's son versus what's called a prince versus our history. And those wounds are still open because there was no healing. There is no reconciliation or forgiveness or saying, I'm sorry for what I've done. And it's still going on mentally, physically in America. And nobody come to the aid of this young woman or these young women today, but at least in the story, her brothers got even. It's painful when you think about it. At least, no, painful when I think about it, of how they treated and mistreated people as if they were none being. We have a long ways to go in this word.
Thank you so much for that, that adding. And that is certainly true when it came to the history in this country where women and black women are specifically concerned. As we continue to look at this story, after forcing himself upon her, it says that he began to want her, his soul cleaves for her, and he tells his father to get Dinah for her because he wanted to marry her. Now, there's a lot of debate about did he really take her by force? Some scholars argue that the words in the Bible text could mean something quite different. It could mean that Shechem had intercourse with her without following due procedure, without the correct formalities. He and Dinah had sex without first having a marriage ceremony, and so Shechem has treated her as a harlot. He should have first approached her family and asked for her hand in marriage. Because this had not been done, the girl and her family had been humiliated and dishonored. So there is some back and forth about whether it was actually rape, or was it the fact that because he had not done the proper thing, he had sex with her without marriage, was the problem itself. But either way, the fact was she had no say-so in it, because he was the male, he was the prince, and whatever he wanted took place. So the fact of the matter is, it was by force, whether it was sex, just simply sex before marriage, or he actually raped her. But as we continue to look at it, he tells his dad, you know, he wants this woman for his wife. And so when Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, he didn't do anything. He waited until his sons came to say anything. He hears that Shechem has defiled his daughter, but he decides to stay quiet about it until his sons return from the field where they are tending to the family's cattle. Now remember, this is Jacob. This is not his twin Esau, the rugged man, the outdoorsman, the fighter. This is Jacob, the homebody, the passive one. So his personality is still playing out. Perhaps if this was Esau's daughter, it would have played out a little different because he was the warrior, the fighter. So was this lust or love? Jacob raped Dinah, and we have never read of any remorse from him or anyone in the city. He was a prince and he could do whatever he wanted to do. Now, I told you that there's another story of rape in the Bible when it comes to David's daughter Tamar, which was a whole different situation. Shechem realized he loved her and he spoke tenderly to her, but not in fear of any retaliation. He never expressed any remorse. He never thought he did anything wrong, because actually in this society he did not do anything wrong. He had no moral or legal obligation to marry Dinah, so perhaps he really did love her, because marriages were arranged by families. So he told his father to get her for his wife. And then finally in verse 26, we will see that he ended up taking her home. So the initial reaction of Jacob, I would say, is pretty awful. Just think about our fathers, what kind of reaction, our fathers that you know, what kind of reactions that they may have if they have heard that their daughters were raped. Now, again, Jacob is the passive type, and this is also Leah's daughter. Perhaps if she was Rachel's daughter, it may have been something else. Some say he may have been in shock, but he was supposed to be the spiritual leader of this family, and this was his only daughter. But his reaction was to keep silent. He should have gone to his knees in prayer and to ask God for proper justice. He didn't tell his wives, but he went on a pity party and he waited for his sons to come home. And so Hamor, which is the daddy of Shechem, arrived at the same time as the sons, but he came to Jacob's house to arrange for the marriage, and he did not come for an apology. There's still no remorse, still no apology. It is still not about Dinah, but it is Diana. It is about Shechem and what Shechem wanted. So when we get to verse 7, the sons arrived and they were angry. At least we get some emotion from them. They seem to think of their home area as property of Israel, perhaps from knowing God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it says that, and the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, meaning they were very angry because he had wrought folly in Israel in line with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. And Hamor communed with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you give him to wife, and make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you. And ye shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade ye therein, and get you possessions therein. So again, they have started, Hamor has started the negotiations to bring Diana to his son. She is now the object. He talks about his son's love for her, but there is no apology. Then he proposed a merging of the families. So remember earlier on, we talked about marriage was nothing to do with love, even though he said that he loved her. Now, when he said he cleaved to her, that could have been, you know, he wanted to be near her physically, sexually, emotionally. It may not have been it could or it could not have been a factor. But marriage was about political alliances. It was about property, was about wealth. So he's saying merge the families so that they could have more land and they could trade with each other. Now remember, early on, Abraham did not want his family intermarrying the Canaanites. But this is exactly what's being proposed. That the families would be able to marry each other. And it says, you give us your daughters, you can have our daughters. And that we will be able to trade. Again, there was no reaction from Jacob at this time. So when we get to verse 11, now learn that Shechem also had at the meeting, again, he had no remorse or apology, such was not deemed necessary. If we look in verse 11, and Shechem said unto her father and unto her brethren, he's talking now, Shechem, the guy, the rapist, is talking to Jacob and his brothers and saying, let me find grace, let me find favor in your eyes, and what you shall say unto me, I will give you. So remember, you got dowries that come along, you got passing of money, you got land that's being passed. And so now it's almost like they are selling her as a harlot to be purchased. Perhaps since they knew that Jacob had 4 wives and children from all of them, they thought he had no room to talk. He seems to really love her, but he is a product of his environment. So even if he did love her, as we would consider a man loving a wife, a woman who wants to marry her, he still was a product of his environment, a product of his culture. And so he offered to give them whatever for the girl. Jacob's sons show restraint, but they learn from their father how to scheme. So let's keep reading. He says, ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as you shall say unto me. But give me the damsel to wife. Whatever you want, I give it to you. All I want is the woman. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully, and said, because he has defiled Dinah, their sister. And they said unto him, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. Now, what does he mean about this circumcision? Remember back early on that the promise was made that every male was going to be circumcised as a sign of being a covenant person, a part of the covenant family. So the brothers are saying, look, if you want her, you got to become circumcised. You got to become circumcised. But in this will we consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughter to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. But if you will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will go home. But there is a scheme there, and we're going to find out what that's all about. So they use their religion as a pretense to discuss his offer, and they came up with a ruse. Again, Jacob is given no leadership. We don't know. Perhaps he prayed, or perhaps he doesn't know about this solution. But the plan included blasphemy, murder, and taking revenge on the entire city as they judged all of them for the morals leading to this. God judged Sodom and Gomorrah totally for the sin in the area also, but this is not God's plan. There's a difference between Sodom and Gomorrah and God judging, and then the brothers coming up with this plan. So they pretended to agree with Hamar's concept of merging if they respected their religious requirements. And if they did not, they were going to take their sister home. So let's continue reading with 18. It's funny, but it's not funny. In verse 18, in their words pleased Hamor and Shechem and Hamar's son. So everybody's pleased. And the young man deferred not to do the thing because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. And Hamor and Shechem his son came unto the gate of their city and communed with the men of their city, saying, these men are peaceable with us, therefore let them dwell in the land and trade therein, for the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Now, when you see the city gates was kind of like at the town square. That's where all of the big meetings was held. So when you wanted to bring all of the people, and it was definitely all of the men, the heads of the houses, you bring all of them together, and Hamor told them what was going to take place. That look, these men, they come in peace. This is what we're going to do. There's enough land for everybody here. So they had that meeting. Pastor Green, did you want to add?
Yeah, I can. Part of knowing the customs is so important, as you mentioned earlier, because Hamor, Shechem's son, wanted to marry Dinah. He wanted her for his wife, and he was willing to do whatever it took that I don't lose this young woman. Jacob worked 14 years for his 2 wives and their 2 servants. And so this man is making an honest appeal with his father, with Jacob's brothers, and the deceitful piece that comes up from Jacob's brothers, from Leah's other boys, is that they knew after 3 days these men will not be able to defend themselves in battle. And as their father is a schemer, the boys are schemers. And the hurtful part would play out. Not only did all the men in the city get killed and it got plundered and raped and robbed and other stuff by Jacob's people, but now Jacob's name in the land that he's promised is no longer trustworthy. It becomes a curse, per se. Anytime you deceive a person and then kill them, that's bad. Rape is bad enough, and deception and murder gets worse. So one lie covers another lie, covers another lie. And when we think through this, how many people that we know have been set up just as Jacob's boys set the men up of Shechem, and do just the opposite of what they promised. And so when I look at how it's been played out, study this word, and then look at our history, how the law is so unfair as it applies to us versus others. So it's interesting that on the 3rd day, we're coming back to town. But this time, we're going to sneak into town and we're going to wipe them out. So there is enough blame to go around, as you say in this chapter 34, and enough of the scheming and deception for everybody. Now, what are the lessons we're going to learn from this as we finish this chapter tonight? Thank you, man.
Okay, thank you. Now, this pitch, of course, they talked about that they're going to merge families, meaning that they're going to also merge property. They're going to merge belongings, material things. So all that belonged to Jacob and his family would belong to Shechem, Hamor, and Shechem, their families. Probably some of the sons of Jacob was probably there also to represent the other side, to make sure that the transaction was legitimate. Jacob should have been the family representative, but we read nothing about him. They all agreed, and all the males were circumcised. Now, remember we talked about earlier about the Hebrew children were circumcised on the 8th day, but the sons would have known from proselyted on the 3rd day. These men would have been in intense pain. So remember, Pastor Green said that they waited until the 3rd day, and then they kind of like ambushed them when they could not do anything, because supposedly the 3rd day after circumcision was more painful, and so they would have been basically incapacitated. So the brothers kind of like ambushed them and caught them when, you know, when they were down on their luck, so to speak. But because they could not fight for themselves, Simeon and Levi were able to kill every male in the city, including Hamor and Shechem. They rescued their city, and their sister, and then they looted the city in revenge. It says that looting was extensive, so it seems they would have needed help from brothers or servants. There's still no mention of Jacob, but as the father, he had to take the blame, because at the end of the day, he was the leader of the family. He was the leader of the chosen people, the people that God had chosen. Since Abraham, he was a part of the covenant family. So not only was he the leader of his family, but basically he was the leader of the nation that was becoming. But we find him still not doing anything. And it says that it seems Jacob knew nothing about what happened until his daughter came home, and they also came with all of the stuff that they had taken. Jacob's sons were they were upset. They were downright angry about what had happened to their sister, because it brought, remember, it was sex before marriage, and it brought shame to the family. In the biblical time, in this time, there's something called honor and shame. Honor and shame. Just as if it was an embarrassment or shame on the husband if the wife could not have children, it was just as much a brought shame when you know there was they did not go through the proper ceremonies, the marriage rituals, the betrothal, but the whole system of getting married. If that did not take place, which is why Mary, when skipping to Jesus, Joseph had a right to get rid of Mary, because he knew he had not had sex with her, and it would have brought shame against him for Mary to be pregnant. Certainly she had to have gone to be with some other man, and so it would have brought shame and humiliation to him. Such is the case. This is why the sons were so angry. Now, they may have thought that God approved of what they did since they were successful in bringing all of the loot home. So they waited until the men were in pain, and they entered the unguarded city, because remember, every male had been circumcised at the same time, which would have meant that every male would have been in pain at the same time. And so this gave them an opportunity to attack the city and take it over. And again, they were able to get their sister, because she was at Shechem's house, and bring her out. So when we finally get to verse 30, and Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and I being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house." And they said, "Should he deal with our sister as with a harlot?" No, again, Jacob, in this narrative, by finally speaking up, but he does not criticize or condemn them, but he feared that what they did caused his reputation, as it says in the King James Version, to stink. He was concerned about his reputation. He was thinking of himself. Still no talk about what happened to his daughter. When he finally speaks, he is angry, and he tells Simeon and Levi that they have brought trouble on him. Now everyone will hate them and try to kill them, because remember, they are in a foreign territory. His anger is stoked not by any ethical consideration, but by the fear that they have become animals who will be hunted down by the allies of the city they have attacked. He rebukes his son for backing out of the agreement they had with the people of the city. But hasn't he himself used deceitfulness all of his life to get what he wants? He does not like when his sons do the same thing. But look at his son's reaction in verse 31. It's almost like they're saying, you know, you're concerned about yourself, but should we just let him do what he wanted to do to our daughter and exchange money and materials and things and treat her like a harlot? They call her our sister rather than your daughter. Again, the relationship between Jacob and Dinah was a crazy kind of relationship from the beginning, because she came from Leah, and she was a girl in the midst of all of these boys. Jacob does not respond. Basically, there's really no answer that he could give. And I got this verse here, Matthew 10:28. "Do not fear for those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him," meaning God, "who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." So again, Jacob is concerned, it would seem. Now, well, let me just say this. In that time, because he had made an agreement with this city, even though all the men had been killed, there were allies who would frown upon what Jacob's sons had done. So they would be a stench to the city and other cities around. Their vaunted moral purity used for murder and pillage. In other words, they had this, the brothers had this, this thing that they were going after to revenge what had happened to their daughter for moral sake. And Jacob's complaint stopped with a single question from Simeon and Levi. What did you do? Had he forgotten that his daughter was raped and then treated as a harlot for sale? Then the proposal for merger of the families so that the purity of Jacob's family and the promises of God would be destroyed. Because remember, if Jacob's family got to intermarrying with the Canaanites, then the bloodline would have been tainted. And so it's almost like the brothers are trying to make sure, even though they went about it the wrong way, they wanted to make sure that this bloodline of God's called out people, called out family, was going to be pure to be able to bring about this nation that God had promised. So as we come to the end, there's no person that comes away without sin marring them in this story. It is a shameful incident in the life of God's chosen people, but God still does not give up on Jacob. And when we get to Genesis 49, 5 and 7, Jacob is going to finally say something about Simeon and Levi's actions. He's going to basically pass over them with his blessings. Remember, blessings are important from father to son. And so he's going to say, let my soul not enter into their council. Let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lame oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and for wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Egypt. So in Israel. So in the end, Jacob does speak out, but I'm afraid he never spoke out for the daughter. That's hurtful for me, but he did not. And another disturbing thing for me in this story is that we never got to hear from Diana, from her voice, from her perspective. Again, in the beginning, it was her actions. Certainly she did go off looking for companionship, going out among the other, looking for friendships or whatever from the other women, and would not, perhaps not getting attention and seeing what the relationship between Jacob and Leah was, which spilled over to her. Then perhaps, even though I believe that she was raped, she did go seeking perhaps attention somewhere else. And let's just be real, a lot of times women, girls, if they cannot get that attention from fathers, they will end up getting it from somewhere, and sometimes it's not a good thing. Okay, that ends our lesson tonight, so I'm going to open it up for anyone who has anything that they may want to say or